Hello there and welcome back for a presentation, this time on what is geography. So many of you may be taking one of my classes or a physical geography class and you're thinking, what did I sign up for? What is geography? The purpose of this video is to provide an overview as to what geography is as a discipline, what it's defined as, what it is, what it may not be, what it kind of is, and how we as geographers can perceive it and observe it and interpret it in our landscapes. And then I'll also wrap up just kind of the founding people of geography as a discipline around the world, but predominantly in academia. So that being said, welcome to What is Geography? Well, I can't think of a better place to begin than what is the definition of geography? So according to the Oxford Dictionary, geography is the study of the physical features of the earth, its atmosphere, human activity as it affects and is affected by these, including the distribution of populations and resources, land use, and industry. So it's a pretty heavy definition. For me, I've mentioned this in my other classes, geography for me is the why things are where they are, why people interact with the planet the way they do, why people are distributed the way they are, and animals and agriculture and plants and the atmosphere and oceans. It's a lot of those why questions. Right here you can see next to me the big sphere. You've got geography in the middle. And we'll talk about it in a moment, but geography is really divvied up into two families, being either human or physical. But around that circle you can see all of these different disciplines. So perhaps you're not a geography major, but maybe you're, a sociologist, or you're studying theology, or you're studying history or business. Geography is interwoven within your discipline. So around here we have things such as anthropology, economics, political science, linguistics, geology. All of these subdisciplines have geography foundations. We understand the physical features, the places, how it interacts. So as an example, we'll pick business. I think, you probably think, how can business be involved in geography? Well, when you're having a business, you're looking at perhaps locations for opening up brick and mortar. You need a location when it comes to things like that. Maybe your business is real estate and you're looking at space and place for development. You need to understand soil technology to decide whether or not this is an appropriate place to build things. We can look at trade and international relations and space and place. Geography is somehow rooted, again, in all of these and many more disciplines within our academia and our world. Kinesiology. What does geography have to do with kinesiology? Well, depending on elevation, there will be a shift in atmospheric sciences within pressure, which will then either create some type of resistance or less of resistance when performing. So if you're playing baseball and you're training in a place with really high elevation, you'll find that you'll have less resistance because there's less atmosphere and pressure pushing down on you, and you can actually throw farther versus being at a place at lower elevation. So we find that it's a very broad field when it comes to geography. Now, moving forward, we can look at, how do geographers see it? So as I've mentioned already, geography is really broken up into two subfields. You have physical, which is the physical landscape, and then you have culture, or human. And they both are interwoven, right? Because, I am a human living in a home, and my home has a physical space or place. It has a soil, there's atmosphere around it, I deal with the water, there's river behind me. There's a lot of different things that really correlate, but the big difference is looking at a physical space and looking at the people in that space. Other ways that geographers can then see those fields, those subfields, is through spatial analysis by looking at what we see within our space and understanding location, understanding time, understanding distance. So I provided a vintage map of Los Angeles, and this vintage map has roads and locations and topography, meaning that it shows the Baldwin Hills, and we can see all these different elements that create an understanding of location and space and place, and then we can add that human or cultural aspect by looking at cities and homes and people, right? Another way we can look at it is through field work. By going outside, maybe some field work can be done inside, looking at computer systems and data analysis, but by going outside and doing a study, doing surveys of people, surveys of our roads, surveys of mountains, surveys of sea level rise, survey of what type of water quality are found in our local streams and ecohabitats. And then lastly, just the bubble of earth science. Earth science is this, another field that we look at in geology that includes geography and atmospheric sciences and oceanography. So we look at the world through a lot of different lenses. But what it comes down to is we're trying to discover the why. Why? Why is this rock so old? Why is this rock here? Why is this mountain here? Why is this valley here? Why is there an earthquake fault? And why does this place get earthquakes and this place doesn't? Why are there tornadoes there but not here? And that's what geography comes down to, is trying to find and to decipher the world that we can observe and then interpret that world. So another thing that I can mention is, maps, right? Cartography. So when you think of geography, the first thing most people correlate it with are globes. And that's fair, right? Because globes are the world represented in a different scale that we can observe and interpret everything around it. Some globes are political, meaning that they show political boundaries and country names and populations. And sometimes globes may also include more of your physical geography, or they may be relief, meaning that they're in 3D and you can actually touch landscapes and mountains and valleys. Sure, this is more textbook style, how geographers can observe and see the world. Great. But how do people like me, because you can obviously see behind me a very distracting background, but how do people like me also, in addition to, observe the landscapes around us? So perhaps if you have had the privilege or opportunity to visit one of the Disney parks here in California, these 4 landscapes may be very familiar to you. Looking at the farthest on the left being Big Thunder Mountain, working our way into Grizzly Peak there in California Adventure, then while still visiting California Adventure, looking at the Cadillac Range and over into Cars Land, and then of course the Matterhorn. All 4 of these locations are not real, right? They've been created by humans to inspire imagination and for amusement, right? True. But, however, there's a lot of truth in what we see in these landscapes. We can actually observe and decipher stratigraphic geology, looking at time, looking at erosion patterns. We can look, as an example, just look here at, where's my mouse? We're looking at this waterfall here at the bottom of Grizzly Peak. Well, these concrete rocks that were created are column basalt. This is a very unique type of geology that can be found in places like the Devil's Postpile. And when rocks, in their development, when they're in a molten state to when they harden, in the right environments, will crystallize based on their geology and their chemistry. And in this case, they make these perfect hexagons, columns, right? Looking here at Big Thunder, we can see the different layers of strata that have been deposited. And then we can now see, due to erosion and weathering, the different layers, different colors represent, these lighter layers here are representing material that is more resilient to weathering. And in actuality, it's probably a replica of something that would be more volcanic, because it's redder and white and being ash and pyroclastic debris deposits. The Matterhorn here as well, all looking at representations of geology. We can observe and interpret this, and because these places, although they're imaginary in most cases, right, we believe it because we can see it, and because it makes sense geologically. It makes sense within our spatial understanding of the world that we live in. Something else we can look at is, well, where does geography look in academia? Lots of different courses. If you're taking classes in college, you can look at the course schedule and see there's all kinds of different classes. There's, of course, physical geography, there's a human or cultural. Perhaps you study weather and climate, looking at world regions around the globe, maybe even more specialty, like here in California, we offer California geography, maybe a field studies, and of course, GIS, or Geographical Information Systems. GIS is really looking at the cartography or the mapping and data, and also uses statistics. Math. It takes statistics to project and to analyze a space. Maybe you want to look at population growth or demographic growth or economic growth or decline. We can use data, put it into a GIS system, and analyze it and create some type of projection or some type of model that will give us information into the future. All right. What about geography in the workplace? These are all ways that we can look and observe and understand what geography is. So as a geography major, you're probably thinking, what am I going to do, teach? Well, you can. I've got a great job. I love it. But it may not be for you. But some of your most common jobs are going to be things like being an actual geographer or environmental scientist for a corporation or for the city or for your local government. But you can also look into things such as urban planning and maybe even landscape architecture. Maybe you want to get involved into politics and looking at demographics and looking at culture and people and place. You can be a political scientist. You can be an analyst or a land surveyor. Land surveying is a very up-and-coming job. It's been around for hundreds of years. We constantly change our landscape, so we must constantly update our maps by using both satellites and ground truthing field units. We can look at crime. Geography of crime is another big field. As a discipline, we are partnering a lot more with our local police agencies because we can predict crime. We can predict locations of high or low crime, and we can try to understand, even motives in some cases. And then moving in away from even crime, we can look perhaps at science and looking at health geography. We've all experienced COVID-19, the pandemic, right? Well, how did we find out where that patient zero was? Where do we find out where all these people may have contracted COVID-19? We can use GIS and geography to map that distribution. We can map out zombie apocalypses. I don't know. Hopefully that's not going to be a thing. That's not on my bingo card. But nonetheless, geography is a career option, and it really touches lots of different subfields as well. So that's kind of like the foundation of what geography is. So what I want to move into next is really what are the stepping stones in understanding geography? And I think that can be done by looking at both critical and spatial thinking. So let's move on to that. So how can you think like a geographer? Well, it's really how we should always think. When I think of critical thinking and the scientific inquiry, I wish that we all, and I include me on this, I wish we all thought in this process when making a decision, no matter what the decision might be. We are a society and a culture of instant gratification. I need it now, I want it now, I need this information now. But sometimes we need to take a moment and process and think about what the question is, how it affects me and my space, my landscape, my culture, my community, right? I'm going to show you the steps because I think that this is really the way that we analyze a space, a place, a question, a thought, an inquiry, something, right? When we're trying to break it down as geographers, we're looking at it through the critical thinking lens. So the first part is asking questions about the spatial relationships in the world around you, is asking that question. So maybe the question is something as simple as, there's a group of you, let's get dinner. Perfect. So sometimes you have that friend that just says, I know exactly where we're going to go. But what if we took it through this process? Let's get dinner as a group of us. Let's ask questions. Questions you can ask. Does anyone have a suggestion of a restaurant or a type of food? Right? That's a simple question. But what about deeper questions? Are there any allergies that we should be aware of? Are there any type of things that could restrict us from getting somewhere? So maybe you have a friend who is transportation insecure, doesn't have a way to get far distances, is relying on public transit. Maybe you have a friend who is living paycheck to paycheck. So you want to take that into consideration and be like, you know what? Maybe we don't go to the steakhouse tonight, or maybe we do something different to accommodate, right? To be more equitable and to share that experience with all of our friends. So ask those questions. Then the next part is to identify the data and information that you need to answer your questions. Now we've asked questions and people said, I've got a gluten allergy. I'm allergic to nuts. I don't have a ton of money right now, so I'd rather do something more local. You can take this information, right? And then we can turn that data into something. That's the step 3, is turning that data into maps, tables, graphs. We're looking for patterns and those relationships by utilizing maybe some type of geospatial program, statistics, just trying to find that average, right? Oh, yeah, we took all this data, so we've decided that we can't do sushi, we can't do steak, and we need to do something within a close proximity. Perfect. So you kind of narrow it down, right? By taking everyone's data into consideration. And then the last part is to determine what the patterns and relationships mean concerning the question. This is where critical thinking comes to play. Once observing the results, you then begin to develop future work, or perhaps even ask more questions. You'll be, oh, you know what, hey, does anyone have any coupons, or is there a Groupon or something on your Amex app or something like that? Or, hey, I really I've got a gift card for going to Lazy Dog or for Sizzler. Maybe we could use that. Oh, you know what, let's, so-and-so can't eat there. Maybe you and I could do that tomorrow or another day, and let's plan something out, right? The process takes longer, but you get to involve everything. You get to include, you get to involve, you get to provide access. It really comes down to, again, that critical thinking and making these bigger observations and interpretations. So the way that this is done in the scientific world is by using the scientific method, right? Like I said, we don't always use this method in all the information and processes and questions that we have. Because if we did, you may often have different results than what you do. I can use Facebook as an example. Doesn't matter. I feel like politics are always on Facebook. Doesn't matter what type of season it is. And you see people sharing things that may be misinformation, may be skewed, maybe not even real at all. I mean, with AI, people, some populations, are having a harder time deciding whether it's authentic or not. So, when, someone shares something on Facebook, ask that question. Is this even real? Well, how would you then assess the next step? We got to do background research. Google it, go to Snopes, start asking questions. Ask the person who posted it. Sometimes people will share a post and you can go back to that original spot. I can't think of the group right now, but there's like a Disney social media account and they share fake things on purpose. The group is satire. And I get posts from friends all the time. Oh my God, can you believe this? I'm like, no, because literally the name of the group is in satire. But they believed it, right? Because they didn't ask questions. They saw it, took it at face value, and ran with it. And that's in hindsight, that's funny, right? Because it's like, oh my gosh, how silly can you be? But this is just like a Disney thing about, fast passes or something. What about when it comes down to politics or medicine or government or something that's actually much more important and affects our lives? This misinformation can be skewed, right? So then you ask your question, do some background research, then you construct a hypothesis. That hypothesis is a really, really good question that we can test. Is this real? Is it not? Is this person who shares bad stuff, if I create something bad, would they share it too? Is that the level that they play on because they don't question, right? Then you can test it, and you decide whether it's working or not. You draw your conclusion, and then at the end of your conclusion, you have to decide. Do you accept? Do you reject? Or do you modify? Yep, I agree. No, I don't agree. Or the modify, which is like, you know what? I didn't get the results that I wanted. I got some results that are important. However, I need to modify my question. I need to modify my methods. I need to modify the data and where I got my data. Maybe I need more, maybe I need less. And there's these adaptations. And at the end, you communicate your result. We don't do this in all of our decisions, right? You look on Facebook and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that Abraham Lincoln said that, and you share it. He didn't say that. I can guarantee you he didn't say it, no matter what the post is. We get in the moment, we get riled up and we share information that may be not correct. All right. I just talked like social media. How do we get back to geography? Maps. Maps is a great example. Is the information that we're projecting true? When you see a map that has skull and crossbones on it saying, don't go to these places, they're really bad, right? You're like, why? Wow, I can't eat at those places anymore. I'm not going to eat there anymore. But then you have to ask those questions, but why? Why did that person create the map expressing they're bad? Yelp. Yelp is a map, right? It's space and place. I've been to places that are fantastic, that have terrible Yelp reviews. Why do they have bad Yelp reviews? There was traffic. The parking was bad. there was someone in the parking lot who yelled at them, so they gave them a bad rating. That has nothing to do with the quality of the food, but it's still misinformation, right? And it still can affect the bigger picture. It affects our communities, can affect that business. That business can have really poor ratings, even though there's absolutely nothing wrong with that business. They just happen to be in the wrong shopping center. And if they were in a different shopping center, they would be the most incredible place to eat. Space and place, right? Asking big questions. Someone could say, oh, this rock is 1.5 million years old. Maybe you don't believe them. So do some background research. Instead of just saying, you're wrong, I don't believe you. Go, well, how do you know? How do you know? What processes did you do to date that rock? And then by asking questions, right? Even though you may have your own bias, by asking these questions, you get answers that can allow you to ask even more educated questions to try to come to some bigger understanding at the end. So that's critical thinking in the field, well, in the world. We should be doing this all the time, but how we look at critical thinking in our geographic lens. So where I want to go next in our presentation is talking about the people. So we kind of talked about what geography is, where we can see it, how we interpret it, but who said so? Who are the key people? And this is just a very small list. There are many, many others that have yet to have their the unsung heroes of the band, right? That may have done incredible things for us as a discipline, but may not have ever gotten credit because of their ethnicity or their gender. But here's a small list of people that have been very impactful in the field of geography that I'm involved in. And you too now, because you're part of this now. You're already deep into this, so you're going to be part of this as well. You're going to earn your Geography Wilderness Explorer badge by the time we're done with this. So let's learn about the people of geography. All right, so let's start way back at the beginning. We're going to start talking about the people of the discipline. So to begin, we're going to talk about Eratosthenes. Now, what's key to this part of the presentation is the name and the big time accomplishments. I'm not worried about dates. I mean, you might be, that's fine. I'm not worried about dates. I'm not worried about these very finite specifics. I'm looking at big picture stuff, okay? So Eratosthenes, so he invented the discipline of geography as we know it today, as well as actually coining the term geography. In addition to that, he's the one who helped create our grid system of latitude and longitude, which there's another video on that next. This is just getting the foundations of what geography is and what it is not. So he created our grid system. He was also the first person to calculate the Earth's circumference along a great circle. He was pretty darn close. He was just a couple thousand miles off. However, this was a time in history when many believed that the Earth was still flat. So he was able to calculate and to decisively prove that the Earth itself is a sphere. There's much more you can talk about as to how he did that, but the premise of it is that he was looking at two wells in two different locations, one in Cyan and one in Alexandria, and realized that at the exact same time, at both those wells, the shadows, there was an angular difference. And because of that angular difference, he could use the Pythagorean theorem to then calculate the missing angle, which is going to help create the curve. And so by looking just down a well, in two different places, he was able to observe and interpret that things were not flat, that there was curvature. Another kind of neat fact about him is that he was the chief librarian of the Library of Alexandria, which was known as the center of learning in the ancient world until it burnt down. So this is the beginning, was Eratosthenes. We then can move forward and look at someone such as James Hutton, who was what we consider the father of modern geology. He was a geologist, but we still kind of hone him into geography because he helped to create essentially the thought of uniformitarianism, too many syllables, and deep time. So born in Edinburgh, James Hutton originated the theory of geology of essentially deep time, and understanding that when we look at exposed rock or strata, that there are layers, and that there must be an order of operations, that whatever is on the bottom should have been first, and then layers stack, just like you would if you're stacking textbooks. What you put down first should have been first, and then whatever's on top was what was put down more recently. At the time, the world thought the Earth was no more than 6,000 years old in the scientific community, but he knew otherwise. And because of him, you may have seen it, the idea of deep time, is we're looking at the Earth in like a almost like a tornado, and it's like a curl. And we can look at the spiral and go, wait, no, it goes back much, much farther than what was thought. And that was also by using the fossil record as well. He also was big on trilobites and looking at what was called the trilobite paradoxities, where we had two sets of trilobites across the greater Atlantic Ocean that were the exact same, yet they were, thousands of miles apart. Anyway, we move forward. Let's look at someone. If you notice, all these people look very grumpy in these portraits. Alexander von Humboldt, he was born in the Kingdom of Prussia, but he compiled quantitative research on botanical geography. He was our first botanist, looking at really biogeography. He was the first person to document human-induced climatic change within regions by documenting impact over time. So he was really the founding piece of our biogeography, which then laid down that precedence for other people such as Darwin. I know we think about Darwin for the theory of evolution, but he was a biogeographer as well. He was studying leaf patterns and design in different climatic regions over time. Moving forward, we look at Carl Ritter, who is what we consider the father of more of our modern geography over Eratosthenes. He was also the first department chair of geography in Berlin. He traveled to both North and Western Africa on behalf of the British government to negotiate treaties, even at this time, to stop the trans-Saharan slave trade. But I picked this quote. I like this quote a lot from him, which is, I think, what also helps kind of describe geography in this bubble. Geography is a comparative anatomy of the earth, rivers, mountains, glaciers. So many distinct organs, each with its own appropriate function. So when I interpret that quote is that he sees the earth as a living thing, and every part of it is what allows it to thrive. Our rivers, our mountains, our glaciers, our deserts, our people, our water, our atmosphere, all these things are pivotal. And if one of these things is to cease, like an organ were to quit in your body would not be able to go on and the earth will not be able to move forward. We look at Charles Lyell, another Edinburgh-born. He created the principles of geology, which helped explain Hutton's deep time in a better spectrum. He was also the first to, now look at that, there's an extra O there. Don't look at that, don't look. He was the first to explain the correlation with volcanoes as well as earthquakes, because we've learned early on that when we started having earthquakes in certain areas, usually, if the geology is appropriate, earthquakes are a great telltale sign of volcanic eruptions afterwards. He further studied stratigraphy, which again is those layers of material that can be exposed. When you're driving on the freeway and they've done a cutout, you can see the different layers of rock. That's all different time deposits. He also discovered and worked with volcanics and glaciers, and for a short time worked with Charles Darwin with his theory of evolution. Okay, so you're probably thinking so far we are 5 people in and they all look like very angry men. Yes. So we have to remember that many people were involved within our field, but many of them are unsung. They were not, at that point in time, the scientific community was dominated by white males. And so if someone beyond that made a discovery, they just did not get credit. It usually would move on. Like there was one, like the first fossil was found by a woman, but no one was going to believe her, so her husband took it and ran with it, and he got credit. But as we dig deep into history and as we start to learn more, we find more of these unsung heroes. So I threw a couple in here because I think it's important to acknowledge and perhaps to inspire you to help me find some more. So the first one here is Ellen Churchill Semple. She was the first female president of the AAG, which is the Association of American Geographers. Her area of specialty was human geography. She authored 2 of the most used geography history textbooks in the United States in the 1900s. And her field research took her beyond the U.S. She did extensive research in the Philippines, Japan, Egypt, Korea, and many, many more. So her role and contribution, aside from being the president of our largest geography associations in the U.S., is that she was a textbook author and that she was trying to get real field data and relevant data to bring it back into a classroom. Another person we have is Alfred Wegener. So he's very important. He was also unsung too, in the sense of what he was trying to discover was not, people weren't accepting it at that time. And it wasn't until later, after his death, that his name came back up again and they're like, oh, he was right. So he was a meteorologist. He studied atmospheric studies. He did a lot of work globally, but he, in his polar research, began diving deeper into what he felt was the theory of plate tectonics. And he kept writing and researching and writing and researching this idea of continental drift. Because we agreed that it looked like continents looked like they belonged together, but we didn't know how they would move because it wasn't something we could see. And while, out in Arctic regions, seeing large pieces of ice calve off of these glaciers and float along the ocean, it's believed that that's what inspired him to think that we are just floating upon some molten material that allows these continents to move. So he could continue to do research, and he ended up actually dying due to exposure while he was doing his last bit of research. But he presented in 1912 the theory of the continental drift, and he was pretty much laughed out of the scientific community because there was no research that could provide or prove his points. And it wasn't until really the 1940s, during submarine warfare, when we started taking imagery of our ocean floors, where all of it came together. It was like, oh no, he was right. So speaking of that, we also have Mary Arizona Baber, known as Zonia. She was an American geographer and geologist, best known for her methods and experiential learning. She took students out in the field to learn. Baber introduced field work and field trips to her curriculum, which is something that we still do today in online worlds. It's a bit more challenging, but we do what we can. But we do believe in that field work and taking you to these spaces and places to then make your textbook that you have, your geography textbook, and to take it beyond the pages to a real landscape. She was also, at this time, which is pretty impressive, a lifelong activist and advocate for human rights, women's suffrage, racial integration, anti-colonialism, and was instrumental in having textbooks remove outdated phrases and concepts that would perpetuate negative prejudices. So she was an activist well beyond her years, and all the way through her life, she was big on pushing this. But field work, very important. So the Leopolds, I just picked Luna because his specialty was fluvial, looking at water management. But all the Leopolds, his dad, Aldo Leopold, and then all of his siblings, they were all huge within the field of geography and geology. But Luna in particular was known for his research in fluvial geomorphology, or understanding how water runs and operates and shifts and changes our landscapes. Leopold suggested new philosophies for water management, one based on geographic, and climatic factors. This was to protect resources and to control the economic, social, and political factors. Still to this day, people with water have power. You need water. We need water for drinking. We need water for toilets. We need water for agriculture. We need water for commerce. So finding different ways to mitigate and to share the power of water is very, very important. Our final person is Marie Tharp. So Marie Tharp was known for her discovery of the mid-Atlantic ridge in the Atlantic Ocean, and further studied and created the first map of the Atlantic Ocean floor. So her contribution to our field is more in the oceanography area by taking data and creating really the first visual representations of our oceans. That's huge. Up to this point in her time, we didn't know what they looked like. We knew more about space than we did our own oceans, and that's still true to this day. What's interesting about Marie is that her discovery of this mid-Atlantic ridge was initially dismissed as what they called girl talk. When Tharp first identified a V-shaped rift valley running through the center of the mid-Atlantic ridge, suggesting that new crust was being developed. So we're seeing this V shape, we can see that what ends up happening is that material was coming up and spreading apart, and we were seeing that the Earth was essentially tearing itself apart and making new oceanic crust. The person that she was working with, Bruce Heesen, said, no, that's not true. She didn't give up. So as time progressed, further investigation and looking at government issued research that came from sonar and ocean studies he said, "Oh, I was wrong. You're right." And together, their work eventually helped prove the revolutionary theory of plate tectonics and the understanding of our ocean floors, and looking at our ridges and seeing areas of growth where we can see new ocean developing and pushing apart. And then we can then understood more about subduction zones and where that old oceanic plates were being subducted underneath our continental plates. So without her tenacity, we probably still would not know hardly anything about our oceans. But she was that building block. So these are some of the key people of geography, which brings me to my last slide. What is or is not geography? We can think of, we've covered a lot. I think almost everything has geography in it. It may not be very direct, but we can look at a pattern or a design that we can relate it. So yes, the sound of music may not be geographical, right? However, understanding where music came from and how it traveled, like grunge, and how grunge started in Southern California and then moved up into Washington State and moved around. We can look at spatial place and design. How maybe the internet, your internet as a whole may not be geographic. However, understanding how the cable works, where it travels, and these centers in which data is able to be driven, and looking at the heat that is generated from these massive computers that are thinking and running AI, and so there are elements of space and place. It's just you have to be creative with that idea, like what is or is not geographic, especially when it comes to either being physical or cultural. Well, we did it. We made it. So geography is a lot of different things, and I think it really depends on the lens in which you are observing and interpreting this field. I hope that this was helpful introducing the field of geography, understanding the basics of critical thinking, and some of the people who said this is what geography is, and really kind of creating a precedence of why you're here and why you're going to hopefully spend some time with me in the rest of my videos to learn more about the field of geography. If you have any questions, be sure to throw those in the comments below. Don't forget to like, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so, because it helps me get my information and our resources out to students like you, but around the world. Thank you for your time. Have a great day, and we'll talk soon.